Stephan Pastis, Looking Up. Chapter 13. Aren't you glad I'm not my mother? Now, you're probably going to want to ask me all sorts of questions about my mother, so let me just say this. When my mother promised to take me to punches, she swore on my piñata's head. And sure, maybe she wasn't breaking that promise when she put it off a week, but when punches got torn down, she broke that promise. And yeah, I know it's odd that my mom's the person putting all those spiky posts into the ground while I'm the one throwing them into the creek, but sometimes that's how the forces of the universe balance out. And while I'm at it, let me just say that the worst saying ever is the one that goes, the apple doesn't fall far from the tree, which I think means a kid is a lot like the person who raised them. But that's really dumb, because I would never break a promise like that. So in this case, the apple fell so far from the tree, it rolled to the other side of the world and somehow became an orange. Anyhow, after hearing how much Daniel's drawing meant to him, it got me to thinking about some other way to stop the sale of his house. And I mean really thinking. Like a knight planning for battle, who in their day would climb to the top of a castle turret to survey their lands and determine the strength of the approaching enemy, mostly by counting the number of banners they had. And so I did the same, climbing the trellis behind our house to the roof, where I counted all the for sale signs scattered around the neighborhood. 10, 11, 12. But I didn't do it alone, for I brought along my life partner, Dr. Rutherford B. Hayes. And before you get any ideas about taking a turtle onto your roof, don't! Because for one thing, you're not a knight. And for another, my turtle is as nimble as a monkey. Also, I wanted to be extra nice to him because I had been spending all my time with Daniel, and I know I told you that my life partner mostly liked being alone, but he also liked being appreciated. And when it came to being a perceived slight, Dr. Rutherford B. Hayes could be as delicate as blown glass. Blown glass. Anyway, the point is that I thought I'd make it up to him by giving him this high perch and asking for his advice, which worked. Too well. Because there's one thing he loved. It was someone seeking his wisdom. And sure enough, as soon as I lifted him onto the chimney, he poked his head out of his shell and began offering so many opinions it was hard to keep up, which might sound helpful. But it wasn't. Because not one of the topics he raised was germane to the situation, and so I had to listen as he discussed beets, gold, gills, film, stamps, stumps, lungs, kings, kin, kale, art, darts, racing, bathing, running, taking, giving, satin, silk, milk, bridges, wrinkles, sprinkles, ballets, ballrooms, ballgowns, opera, onyx, oryx, orcas, dances, lances, shamus, shavers, shin guards, shampoos, Shawshank Christmas, isthmus, wish list, fish lips, pool dips, day trips, domes, dams, diving, driving, dining, truth, shoes, fur, law, saws, spoons, loons, moons, glue, pasta, postcards, rainbows, Rome, Rames, Rio, rugby, raisins, ruins, rice, rain, rafts, rifts, roofs, cups, cliffs, clouds, wine, foes, ice, lice, anger, danger, rangers, dentists, dendrites, nightlights, bright lights, light brights, yoga, Yoda, yawning, winning, lava, liver, louvers, Levi's, cable, kibble, housing, hooves, grooves, moves, trees, dimes, limes, travel, banjos, cobblers, comfort, condo, caring, Cairo, carbon, watches, witches, Wasatch, Sasquatch, finals, fennel, funnel, tunnels, and finally the British Channel. Anyhow, when he was done, I was so tired I didn't even think to ask him about how to save Daniel's home, because I don't know about you, but when I get tired, I forget just about everything. And so I picked up Dr. Rutherford B. Hayes, who, having been given the opportunity to show off his smarts like that, felt like $1,000,000, and I walked down the roof with him, his dignity restored, which was when I remembered another trait of mine when I am tired, clumsiness, which was right about when I dropped him. Bounce, bounce, bounce. Chapter 14, Skeleton Key. Dr. Rutherford B. Hayes landed perfectly in an ice-cold cooler of fresh lemonade, and I mean perfectly. Sploosh. As though in a past life he had been a diver off the cliffs of Acapulco. And I'm telling you, if I had tried to throw him into that lemonade, I couldn't have done it if you'd given me 1,001 chances. So physically, he was fine. Emotionally, it was a whole different matter, for he was not happy about the humiliation of bouncing down the roof like an orange. Now the good news was that I was the only person who saw it. That is, if you don't count Daniel, who was waiting for me on the front lawn, holding that cooler of lemonade. Though I don't think I told you why, so let me back up. You see, despite Daniel and his uncle having all their stuff packed up and being ready to move, their house had still not sold. And although I wanted to believe it had something to do with our storming of Chuck Less, the truth was that I didn't really know. All I knew for sure was that his uncle was getting nervous, especially given the fact that he'd already taken a writing job in another town, and so he told Daniel that he had to keep the house especially clean for any potential buyers who might want to drop in and have a look. And that meant he couldn't have any friends over, which meant me. So if Daniel and I were going to continue to meet at his house, we had to make sure his uncle didn't find out. And thus we devised a system of communication for when his uncle was and was not home. And the system we worked out was this. When his uncle was home, Daniel would tap 3 times on his bedroom window with the end of his cane. Tap, tap, tap. When his uncle was not home, Daniel would do this. Uncle not home. Only it didn't go quite as well as hoped, because once, when his uncle was home, Daniel grabbed his cane and tapped on the window so hard he did this. And Daniel got into a lot of trouble for it, because his uncle was trying very hard to sell the home, and broken windows did not help make it more appealing to buyers, even if those buyers were probably going to tear it down anyway. And that's when I had a brilliant idea. Light bulb to symbolize brilliant idea. And that idea was this. If buyers were already hesitant about buying the home, we could do our part by making the situation worse. Much worse. So on a day when his uncle was gone, we set up what we called a consumer information station, right outside of that same broken window, where we offered free lemonade, the cooler that my turtle plopped into, and helpful advice. Bad house, don't buy. Aren't you worried your mom is going to see you out here? Asked Daniel. No, I answered. She's at work. What if somebody tells her? So what if they do? Nobody knows it's me. Why do you think I'm wearing my helmet again? Smart, he said. But what would she do if she did find out? I mean, not just about what we're doing here, but what we did at the office and all that. Daniel, life is filled with what-if dragons. I'm here to slay them. Right, he said. But I could tell he still wasn't persuaded, especially because of what he said next. But what if, we don't succeed, and I have to move to some strange place that I could never be in my house again? I waved my lance. I hereby slay that what-if dragon with my pointy lance, because by the time we're through today, not a person on earth is going to want to buy this house. And as soon as I said it, we were approached by two persons. Hey, pardon me, guys, said the man, but are your parents home? Daniel shook his head. It's my uncle's house. Oh, well, my girlfriend and I are wondering if we can get a quick look at the place. What for? I asked. We're moving into the neighborhood, just looking for something to buy. Big mistake, I told him. Then he laughed, which was insulting. And he said this, which was even more insulting. Nice helmet there. Is it Halloween already? Then he and his girlfriend laughed, like that was some sort of high comedy. Speaking of which, it's amazing how many stupid things adults laugh at. Maybe it's just because they're nervous and can't think of anything else to do, or maybe it's just what you're supposed to do when you're old and have hair growing out of your ears, but I'll tell you this, when I get older, you'll never see me laughing at jokes that aren't funny. Anyhow, it really got us off on a bad foot, and so I said something I probably shouldn't have said. You should know this was once a nuclear testing site. And I don't know why I had to go so big with that particular lie, especially when a simple one would have been fine, though maybe it was because the man could clearly see the broken window behind me and still wasn't discouraged, so I thought, well, try harder. Oh yeah? He asked. Yes, I answered. In fact, if you ever see my colleague and I at night, you'll see that we glow like fireflies. We'll have to be careful of that, he said. But I could tell he didn't mean it, and I hated being humored by any person who thought he was smarter than me, because he wasn't. And I had a turtle that was probably 700 times smarter than both these two people put together, so I said something else I probably shouldn't have said. Well, do what you want, just know this house was built over an old graveyard. And that seemed to get through to the woman, because the smile dropped from her face faster than crumbs from a slice of avocado toast. Are you being serious? She asked. Babe, she's just having fun, said the man to the woman. I'm not, I said. Okay, no, seriously, said the woman. That creeps me out. And I could tell right there, the man felt Daniel's house slipping from his grasp, so he did something that even I have to admit was kind of smart. He talked to Daniel. You live here? He asked Daniel, and before I could stop him, Daniel said, yes, and I don't want to move, which was the exact wrong thing to say, because then the man said, but aren't you scared of the big bad graveyard below you? And then he had Daniel trapped, because if Daniel said no, it would be like we were lying about the graveyard, and if he said yes, then it didn't make any sense why he wanted to stay in the darn house, and seeing my Daniel in distress lose this battle of wits was more than I could take, so I defended him. He is scared, I answered, very scared. That's why he wears steel-toe boots when he walks through the backyard. Steel-toe boots? Asked the woman, who was much easier to excite. What for? So he doesn't trip on any skeletal hands that might be poking out of the ground. Hey! Hey. Stop it, yelled the woman. Just stop it. You're making all this up. I wish, I answered. She is making all this up, said the man to his girlfriend. And it's ridiculous. There are no hands coming up for the ground. Then he turned to us and said, no, your parents home or not? Uncle, Daniel corrected him. Whatever, said the man. Let's just leave, said the woman, whirling around and folding her arms over her chest. Creepy little kids. But then her fear turned to anger, and she turned to me. Let me guess. This is your best friend's house, and the dilapidated one across the street is yours, and you don't want to see your best friend move? Which was more or less true, though I would quibble with some of the details. Is that what you're afraid of? She continued. People with money turning a neighborhood no one likes into one that people do? Well, if it's any consolation, I don't think anyone would ever buy your house. And just when it looked like she was done, she remembered one more thing. Oh, and your little cardboard outfit? It looks ridiculous. Baby, come on, said the man as he put his arm around her and led her away from the table. Let's just go talk to their parents. Uncle, said Daniel. And seeing the woman's back turned, I did something that a knight of the round table could never do. but that the winged skull of doom could. I grabbed her ankle. And as she ran off screaming, I couldn't help hurling one curse. May you never find a neighborhood as nice as ours! Chapter 15. Utter Happiness. The afternoon I spent at the Consumer Information Station taught me that each potential buyer had their own particular sensitivities. Sensitivities that could be plucked like the strings of a jester's lute. Like the person I told, great house, if you don't mind sinkholes. And the person I asked, are you afraid of a little toxic waste? And the person to whom I said, 4 burglaries in a month does not make this a bad neighborhood. But after fighting all those noble battles, I was tired and hungry, and we all know how I get when I'm hungry. And so Daniel and I took down our information station and went inside to the kitchen, where Daniel grabbed 2 burritos that his uncle had left for him in the fridge, one marked shrimp and one marked veggie. Which one do you want? Asked Daniel. Veggie, I answered. I can never eat anything with a face, even beady-eyed little shrimp. And so we sat on the floor of Daniel's chairless kitchen and ate our burritos, and said nothing. And you know you're really becoming close to someone when the two of you can just sit there and not say all this stupid stuff about things that don't matter, like how adults talk about the weather and their shoes. And that brings me to something which this may or may not be the place to discuss, and that's this. I think all any of us really wants is to just not be so alone. And if we're really lucky, to even be loved. Though that's not something you should go around expecting, because if you ask me, that's greedy. Anyhow, that's all a long way of telling you that I was pretty darn happy just eating burritos with Daniel. Maybe even better than happy, because I gotta say, seeing how Daniel chewed his food made him just about the most irresistible human being I had ever seen in my life, and I'm not exaggerating. I mean, it was sort of like a cow, if you want to know the truth, like how they chew with their lower jaw swaying from side to side, and how some of the food falls out of their mouth. I first noticed it when he was eating those fries at the Beefy Bee, but it was really apparent with the burrito. And maybe that doesn't sound attractive to you, but for me, it was love. Mostly because it was so earnest, like it was the best thing Daniel had ever eaten. And he didn't care how he looked doing it. And when you find somebody like that in life, you got to keep a close eye on them and not let them wander to wherever that big party is, the one filled with all the people you once knew, the one you never invited to. And so I kept a close eye on Daniel. That's when his uncle came home.